In this video, I'm talking about the top 6 mistakes that most beginner filmmakers make and how you can avoid them. So let's get right into the video. Now, the first mistake that most beginner filmmakers make is misjudging the amount of headroom needed in the shot. And headroom simply refers to the space between the top of your subject's head and the top of the frame. Now, if you have too much headroom, like this, it's going to be very distracting. And if you don't have enough headroom, it's going to look like this. I mean, I'm chopping off most of my head. It looks really awkward. That's really unprofessional and really amateur. So don't do that. Try to avoid that. Try to make sure there's just enough space between the top of your subject's head and the top of the frame, but make sure you can't fit a bus between that gap. Now, mistake number 2 is shooting in the wrong white balance. And this one I completely understand. When you're beginning, white balance is extremely confusing. Assigning a number to a color of light, it just makes no sense. Why is daylight 5600 kelvins and then tungsten light is 3200 kelvins? Who come up with these numbers? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because if you don't match the color to the number, then the light in your shot is going to be inconsistent with the light in the scene. It's going to look awkward. And if you're changing white balance throughout the scene, then your cut is going to go from orange shot to blue shot to orange shot to blue shot, and it's going to be distracting. Your grade is going to be inconsistent and it looks really amateur. So quickly understand that colder or blue light, that's daylight, is a higher number up on the Kelvin scale. And then warmer colors like tungsten or orange are down the lower end around 3200. And when you're filming in a room with one of these colors, so let's say you're filming outside, you want to set the white balance on your camera to 5500 to match the color of the light outside. And the same thing goes for if you're inside in a warm light environment. So mistake number 2 is setting the wrong white balance. And the solution of this is to read the white balance in the scene and set the white balance in your camera to the light of the scene. Now, mistake number 3 is shooting in the wrong frame rate. Now, the frame rate that you need to shoot in depends on what you're shooting. If you're shooting for TV in the UK, you're going to want to set this to 25 frames per second. If you're shooting for TV in the US, this is going to be 30 frames per second. But if you're creating a short cinematic video, this is typically going to be 23.976 or 24 frames per second. But the thing is, 24 and 30 frames per second are very close together. So even if you end up shooting in 30, you can pull this down to 24 in the edit without too much of an issue. But the problem is, if you shoot your entire video in 120 frames per second and you try to pull this into a 24 frames per second project, it's going to look really weird. And because you've had to increase your shutter speed to compensate for the higher frame rate, the footage is going to look really choppy and really weird. Of course, the problem doesn't just lie in shooting in too high of a frame rate and trying to pull this down to a 24 frames per second composition. The problem also lies in the opposite side. So when somebody wants to shoot in slow motion, they forget to increase their frame rate to a higher frame rate, and they end up shooting slow-mo in 24 frames per second and slowing this down so that the footage becomes something like 10 or 8 frames per second. And this always looks really ugly and really choppy. In order to have smooth video, the final video output needs to be at least 24 frames per second. So if you shoot in 24 frames per second and you slow this down by 50% in the edit, you're going to export 12 frames per second. So this means every other frame is going to be missing and it's going to look really horrible in the edit. So if you wanted to do half time, double 24 to get 48, shoot in 48 or 50 frames per second, slow this down by 50% and you'll get 24 or 25 frames per second, and that will look really smooth. So the solution to this problem is to figure out what you're shooting and adjust the settings in the camera accordingly. Mistake number 4 is setting the incorrect shutter speed. As a general rule of thumb, your shutter speed should double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/48. And if you're shooting in 50 frames per second, your shutter should be 1/100. But the problem is, if you pull your shutter all the way down to a smaller number, then you're going to get some horrible distracting motion blur in the shot. And if you end up pulling your shutter speed too high, so you shoot at something like 1/500, there's going to be next to no motion blur in the video and it's going to look really ugly and really distracting. So the solution to this is to shoot at a shutter speed which is double your frame rate. Mistake number 5 is disobeying the 180-degree rule. So let's say we're shooting a scene, for example, we've got two people chatting, they're sat opposite each other, and in order to obey the 180-degree rule, you want to keep the camera on one side of your subjects. So let's say they're sat opposite each other, you want to draw a line down the middle of them, and you want to keep the camera on either the left or the right, never cross over to the other side. So in order to obey the 180-degree rule, you can freely move your camera wherever you need to in this one half of the space, but you never enter into the other side. Now, keeping the camera on the one side of your subjects, obeying the 180-degree rule, basically tells the audience that your subjects are looking at each other. Even if you don't show a wide shot of the two subjects together, you only show their close-ups, you know these two subjects are going to be having a conversation because they're looking in the correct directions. The problem is, if you take one shot from one side of them and you break the 180-degree rule, go around to the other side and you capture a shot of the other person, all of a sudden both subjects are facing the same direction. And that looks really awkward. It doesn't look like they're having a conversation. It looks really unnatural. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that most beginner filmmakers make. So mistake number 5 is breaking the 180-degree rule. And the fix is to keep on one side of the line. And then mistake number 6 is bad sound. It doesn't matter if you have the most beautiful cinematography, your visuals are perfect. If you pair that with awful sound, then your video is going to be awful. Bad video is far more forgiving than bad audio. If you have bad audio, people are going to disengage with your content and end up clicking away to another video. So it's really important to spend time on improving the quality of your audio. The way to improve your audio is quite simple, to be honest. First, you want to stop using the built-in microphone on your camera and get a separate microphone. This is a boom microphone, and for any narrative-based film, this would be out of the shot. But just getting your microphone as close to your subject as possible is going to yield the best sound quality. If you don't have a boom microphone, then you could get a clip-on wireless microphone. This is a small clip-on microphone that your subject can wear, and this again is going to give you really clean and clear sound. Audio doesn't have to be complicated, you just want to get a microphone as close to your subject as is physically possible. The microphone that I'm using is a decent microphone, and it sounds great when it's up close. But the problem is when I pull it over there, all of a sudden the microphone sounds really bad. And the reason why this microphone sounds really bad is because it is so far away from me. Now, the closer that this microphone gets to me, the better the audio quality is, and the better the audio quality is, the better the video appears to be. So mistake number 6 is bad audio, and the solution for bad audio is to invest in a decent microphone and try and get it as close to your subject as is physically possible. Now there you go. Those are the top 6 mistakes made by beginner filmmakers. I am guilty of every single one of those mistakes and so many more, but focusing on those 6 mistakes, really focusing down and improving on all 6 of those areas will really help to improve the quality of your work. If you enjoyed watching this video, or if you found it useful at all, then please do let me know in that comment section below. And of course, if you're subscribed, then I will see you on the next video. See you there.